Visual imagery is a powerful thing that some could regard as a weapon. Once you show audiences a single image from no context at all, it will shape opinions, perspectives, and ideas within an instant. Something as small as this can be terrifying and used for a dangerous purpose, but it can also be used for an uplifting and hopeful purpose. This is something called propaganda. While it isn't always used wrongfully, propaganda can still be scary. Sometimes this theme can present itself without you even knowing it. This is unlike many other theories. An example of one is hyperreality, which forces the audience to question their own ideas of what is real and what is a dream. Some examples of this theory could be found in Inception, The Matrix, and the recent A24 movie, Dream Scenario. This theory presents itself in a very bold and obvious fashion, unlike how propaganda can. But a theory like voyeurism can be in the same boat as propaganda, as it isn't always obvious. The use of camera placement might make you unaware of a character's secret intentions when watching someone, because you could also be viewing from the same lens. Propaganda can also make you believe or agree with something without you realizing it. Opinions on propaganda can vary between different people, but something people can agree on is that given the right context, the imagery can be born out of pure emotion and personal experience, which is what I'll be showcasing in this video.
We knew the world would not be the same.
In 1945, the Second World War was coming to a close after a 6-year conflict. Germany had finally surrendered and many countries stopped along with them, but not Japan, who continued to fight on, which would be a decision that would bring nothing but catastrophe and shape their history for years to come. Prompt and utter destruction is what Harry S. Truman threatened the Japanese government with, and he wasn't wrong. 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the first named Little Boy, which contained an estimate between 12,000 to 15,000 tons of TNT. After this bomb, Japan still didn't surrender. The second bomb then dropped on Nagasaki 3 days after, with an estimated 140,000 people from Hiroshima dead, combined with an estimated 74,000 people dead from Nagasaki. It all resulted in over 200,000 deaths. It's been around 78 years since the US dropped both atomic bombs, but it's still a day that represents sorrow and dread amongst the Japanese people. Stories about these bombings have been shown in different forms of media over the years, with the context and perspective changing depending on the artist. I made it to the entrance of my house, and I think I even took a step inside. Then it happened all of a sudden. Blazing light shot across my eyes. The colours were yellow, khaki, and orange, all mixed together. I didn't even have time to wonder what it was. In no time, everything went completely white. It felt as if I had been left all alone. The next moment, there was a loud roar. Then I blacked out. Victims were left with burn marks, the streets were left with shadows, and buildings were sent back to the Stone Age, leaving Japan as a haunting graveyard. People didn't give up, however. They pulled together and used the resources they had left to build structures and repair their broken cities. Through all of this fallout and horror, there was an opportunity to display perspective. Massive propaganda machines were created from the filmmaking industry, but not just Japan. Everywhere. If there is anything that I'm trying to emphasize with this information, it is that perspective is always key when discussing visual imagery and propaganda. And Toho had a film in mind which would display their own perspective. Now with this context in mind, it will help lay the structure for the creation of Japan's most recognizable creature. So let's finally talk about Godzilla. No, not that one. God no, not that one. Yes, that one, but not yet. Perfect. There we go.
Few people cried. Most people were silent.
Monsters are tragic beings. They are born too tall, too strong, too heavy. They are not evil by choice. That is their tragedy. Throughout the years of cinema, monsters have changed and evolved dramatically. There have been tragic stories like Frankenstein, fears of voyeuristic themes in The Invisible Man, the scary reality of capitalism in King Kong, and the use of surveillance theory in 10 Cloverfield Lane. While all these movies do an exceptional job of telling their individual stories, none of them had a more cultural impact and meaning than Godzilla. Now, it's actually very important for me to emphasize what Godzilla movie I was going to discuss, because Godzilla is actually the longest running movie franchise with 38 total movies, including -1 and Godzilla Kong, The New Empire. Godzilla has changed and evolved rapidly over the course of these movies, with some movies having a more serious and grounded approach, and others having a way less grounded, more silly approach. Yeah, we don't really talk about those times. The original Godzilla movie is a horror movie, no doubt about it. But the reason it is one is because it's less a monster movie and more of a message about post-war Japan and the anxiety around nuclear warfare. From the get-go, the movie opens with a fishing boat on its way back to shore. The fishermen then get exposed to a massive amount of radiation from Godzilla, as the boat is left in flames and the fishermen in the middle of the ocean. This is actually the film's retelling of an incident with the boat named Lucky Dragon 5, which is a boat that is an essential spark to the fears of nuclear warfare for the Japanese people. On March 1st, 1954, the US tested a hydrogen bomb near the Marshall Islands. This bomb was way more powerful than anticipated, as it created a white cloud of ash, which took the Lucky Dragon 5 with it. With no time being wasted, we were already shown the experience that the Japanese people had with this event, and the tone that the rest of the movie was going to rightfully earn. The rest of the movie is described as a slow burn, as you are left waiting anxiously for Godzilla's next attack, similar to how the Japanese people were left terrified for another bomb to drop. Finally, after an hour into the movie, Godzilla emerges from the sea. He walks onto land and destroys everything in sight. Within a few seconds, buildings are demolished and power lines collapsed. Then, after an already lethal rampage, he unleashes his secret weapon. Something I've always appreciated about Toho's take on Godzilla is that they always treat his atomic breath as a final red button of his attacks. In the original, Shin, and -1, the breath is always built up and unleashed to leave a wave of destruction, which exactly mirrors what people saw when the bombs dropped. This effect is actually almost lost in the monsterverse, however, as the 2014 Godzilla movie is the only one that takes time to build up to the atomic breath attack. After that movie, Godzilla uses the breath almost instantly and whenever he wants. While I still appreciate what the monsterverse has done for growing the franchise, I still wish the atomic breath was used in the same retrospect that Toho uses it for. After this attack, you are left to witness what was once a thriving civilization turn to ash and blood within a second. Once again, this visual imagery perfectly replicates the destruction left by the atomic bombs. Scaling is a factor which is incredibly important in many monster movies, but in this movie it is used differently from the norm. When people think of scaling, they usually think about the size of the creature and the usage of camera angles to display how massive these creatures can be. This technique has been done many times in Godzilla movies, with one of the best examples being Gareth Edwards' Godzilla movie, released in 2014. The creature is constantly compared to humans, who are standing right beside it, as a way to indicate its size and structure, and with some masterful close-up low angles being used, scaling is something these movies can do incredibly well. Something like Shin Godzilla, directed by Hideaki Anno, and released in 2016, also uses size scaling really well, with the usage of long shots, as Godzilla is seen towering over buildings in the distance, but Godzilla 1954 does scaling in a different sense. While it too displays Godzilla's size compared to buildings and objects really well, its main usage of scaling is by putting the audience in a human perspective and showcasing that while this is a monster movie, it isn't shying away from the context for its creation. After Godzilla's attack, you aren't left with Godzilla, but you are left with the people, broken families, and children grieving over the loss of their parents. Even when Godzilla is attacking, the camera leaves you with people running or hiding in fear from the monster. This is one of the movie's many feats. With the context behind the scenes being known, it really makes you wonder how this movie got a PG rating. How? Now, Godzilla isn't the only character in this movie which is made to embody a real-world fear. This movie has a character named Dr. Zerazawa, who heavily resembles Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. Both of these people have created world-destroying weapons, but what makes Dr. Zero different is that he hates that he has made this weapon named the Oxygen Destroyer. This depressive moral battle that he has throughout the whole movie is what gives this movie such a heavy emotional core and makes him the greatest character out of everyone, and I don't say that lightly. At the end of the movie, Dr. Zero is sent down into the depths of the ocean to meet Godzilla head-on and detonate the Oxygen Destroyer near him. Even though the Doctor had plenty of time to escape, he decided to cut the rope and stay down there with his creation. He isn't sacrificing himself to kill Godzilla, he is sacrificing himself to kill the information about his creation. He is aware of the turmoil Japan is in, and doesn't want his creation to add to it. So after all of his notes have been burned, he finally rests his thoughts, as he knows there will be no trace on how to obtain this weapon anymore. Once Zero sacrifices himself to destroy the information he possesses, the film ends with the line of dialogue, which is nothing more than haunting. While I've shown you the visual metaphors that this movie displays, I also want to show you the behind the scenes of this movie, but more precisely the love and care of one man who drew together all of his fear and hatred for war into creating this masterpiece.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture.
Ishiro Honda was a young aspiring film director who was loved by the people around him. He knew very early on in life that he wanted to become a film director, but soon after he started to delve into his passion, it all went to a frightening turn. At the age of 23, he was drafted into the Japanese army, and due to his anti-warfare stance, this draft became one of the worst things to happen to him. He hadn't given up on his passion, however, as his dream of wanting to become a movie director is what pushed him through his service. My superior officer killed a young Korean today with a bayonet. I'm trying to adjust to the environment around me, but if you're a normal person in this place, you'd either kill yourself or go crazy. Luckily, he had kept sane throughout this period and treated Chinese and Japanese soldiers alike with respect. Like I mentioned earlier, the war created a domino effect of propaganda films being created everywhere. Ishiro Honda was a director who would heavily dabble into this, and I'm not just talking about Godzilla. The Blue Pearl, released in 1951, was Ishiro Honda's first feature film, which is a love story set in the style of a documentary. This movie was very important for Ishiro's career, as it laid the groundwork for what his style of filmmaking would be. Sacrificial love, sad endings, underwater filming, and social messages, which are all consistent themes he would have in his films, with Godzilla being one of them. Speaking of which, after the success of the first Godzilla movie, Ishiro Honda had been called back to direct 7 more Godzilla sequels, such as Mothra vs. Godzilla, King Kong vs. Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters, and more. He also created 2 spin-off movies, Rodan, released in 1956, and Mothra, released in 1961, which are both great monster movies. These Godzilla movies had consistent themes of man-made horror, nuclear conflicts, humans' reaction to an unstoppable force, the West as the antagonist, and harmony with nature. Some of these themes can present themselves similarly to how the original movie did, but sequels have a trick up their sleeve which the original didn't: other monsters. While Godzilla is such a big name, Ishiro Honda found ways to create many other monsters which would pose a threat to Godzilla and themselves have a connection to real-life dangers. Something for example with Hedorah, who was a monster made from pollution and is meant to be a stand-in for humanity's treatment of polluted spaces. Some of the designs and skill sets of these monsters also display similar themes to the original, with the designs of the creatures and powers being metaphors of real-world incidents, with Ghidorah being able to control the weather, Rodan having access to geothermal capabilities, and Violante controlling plant life. Now, while all of these abilities are changed over the course of many films, there is no denying the footprint Ishiro Honda has left with all these new creatures, and it is all because of what his Godzilla design stands for, which is something I would like to explain further.
Takes on his multi-armed form and says,
If Godzilla had been like a dinosaur or some other animal, he would have been killed by just one cannonball. But if he were equal to an atomic bomb, we wouldn't know what to do. So I took the characteristics of an atomic bomb and applied them to Godzilla. Godzilla's design has changed a ton, even from the original concept, as it was originally proposed for him to be a giant octopus-like being, but Toho insisted on giving him a more prehistoric look, and I'm glad they did. One disturbing fact about his design, however, is that the skin is meant to represent the burn marks left from the victims of the bombings. Godzilla's whole design is a mixture of many different dinosaurs, with him having Stegosaurus-like dorsal plates, a body and a head of a T-Rex, and thumbs similar to that of an iguanodon. This iconic design has been kept the same in most forms of media, but one of the most recent iterations of Godzilla that really pushes his design is from the legendary 2016 Toho movie, Shin Godzilla. This movie treats the design of Godzilla differently, with it being more focused on him evolving as the movie progresses, which in turn makes him more unpredictable and constantly more powerful. While the design change is haunting and incredible, it isn't the only aspect which is different. This movie follows in the same footsteps as the original, with a heavy focus on using Godzilla in a metaphorical sense, and having the visuals and story reflect real-world events. The visuals and story are meant to reflect the Japanese government's poor handling of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. You could also believe the imagery is meant to mirror the devastation left on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, similar to the original film. But another way this film can play with your perspective is by making you sympathise with a monster in some way. This rendition of the character is shown on a surface level to have one objective, destruction. But it's when you look further that you realise he has another objective, to make you hear his sorrow. It is described that Shin Godzilla's destructive tendencies are because of the creature being in constant pain from blood boiling inside of him. While sympathising with the creature isn't a new concept for the franchise, the movie helps put into perspective that maybe Godzilla has always been the victim. He is awoken from the atomic testings in the Pacific and is extracting his revenge because of what we have made him. Shin is a masterpiece in retelling the same concept but still making it fresh and exciting. And this is the direction I want these future projects to go in. Projects which make you love the franchise even more, and make you go back to the original to see that there is another layer to the beast's pain that you never noticed before. The original Godzilla movie is the perfect example of when a filmmaker creates a movie to showcase pure emotion and anxiety about a very harrowing subject matter. This monster has not only been such a massive part of my childhood, but also my identity as a director. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a very proud fan of Godzilla, and with the release of -1, which is one of my favourite films of all time, it has elevated my love for this franchise even further. Godzilla himself may change and evolve with many more movies, but it will always be difficult to top this triumphant anti-nuclear warfare movie. And that is why I think Godzilla 1954 is one of the greatest monster movies of all time. I mean, who knows what creature could be out there, waiting for us to destroy ourselves.
Now I am become death.